Well, we're all set.
Okay. Good morning. I'm Laura DePietro. I'm the Director of Water Quality at the Agency of Agriculture. So each year, the legislature has us put a report together of all the technical and financial assistance programs that we do. So we administer, for example, last year, we administered about $18.4 million out the door to farms and also to partners. And most of that money is really dedicated towards helping farms make improvements above and beyond what the minimum regulatory standards are. And so we put this report out each year to sort of demonstrate all of the different programs that we do. And so what I'll do is I'll just share the actual report with you on Zoom and just kind of dig through it.
You can find this, and the public can find it on our committee page under reports, I believe.
Yes, it's probably there, and it's also underneath me as a witness, this report. So this is the report, and I'll just kind of do a drive-by through it, but it's our technical and financial assistance report. So this is not our regulatory work. We do a separate report for the regulatory work that we do. So essentially, we have several programs, so I'll just kind of put it together here. So BMP, what we call, I'll use acronyms, CREP, SEEP, FAP, SFS, PSWF. This one we don't really have a good acronym for.
Is that Richards where it says Nelson Farms right there?
Yeah, yep. And then the Pay for Performance program. So these are the main programs that we utilize to move money to farmers. So this report basically goes through each one. And so this is a great highlight slide here to show you the accomplishments that were done in the last year. So our staff, we have a great system of tracking how many people are going to farms, who's going to farms. And, a big reason we built it was if someone at the conservation district is talking to the farm, for example, or somebody at UVM, and we show up and we're trying to have a conversation, we know who they're already connected with. And so it's also sort of a content management system to be able to do better team management on a farm. But so we track all of our technical assistance visits and keep in that system. We also have part of that system that we do. We actually have a shared database that all of those partners I just mentioned can utilize to plan a project on a farm, for instance. And we have sort of a firewall in between it where the regulatory side doesn't, like I don't have access to log into that technical assistance side that the partnership can use so that farms can feel very comfortable to reach out to a partner, to ask for help if they think they need help, if they might have a violation, to resolve it. And therefore they're knowing that by working with the partnership, they're not getting themselves in regulatory trouble because they're trying to do the right thing. But we're still able, as the body that is responsible for administering the knowledge of like how much is happening in the agricultural landscape, right? Quantifying it for phosphorus reductions. It's a method that lets us be able to track that farmer did that and we can get the bonus points for it. So we can download the final product, essentially, of a lot of that work to be able to report it up, which is really cool. No other state in the country that I'm aware of has been able to develop something like that, where their partnership can work and get information back up so that accountability can be done. Good, emails aren't popping up in there. Okay, so this first program, the Ag Clean Water Initiative program, is one of our biggest programs. You can see, we're moving several, $6-7 million a year in that program. And we do it really every 2 years. We have big pushes. There's sort of 2 pushes back to back, but in essence, again, this is a lot of, I can show you looking at, it's a partnership. It's our funding of the partnership. So you can see like UVM received $3.1 million. The districts received $2.5 million. A little over $500,000 to Champlain Valley Farmer Coalition, and then another, $350 to the Farmers Watershed Alliance. So you can see, NOFA, Grass Farmer Association. So these are the organizations, and it's all competitive. So they apply, they come up with basically a 2-year plan, and then we try and fund them so that they can have 2 years of awareness of what they're gonna do. And then, and then before those cycle out, basically in that second year, we're starting over again to get another 2 years. But and these folks all work directly with farmers to then do education, do implementation, et cetera. So this is a big chunk of the funding, and this is, clean water funding.
Go ahead.
Can you explain to the committee where your clean water funding comes from? Is it through property transfers or?
Yep, property transfers, also, the bottle of sheets, things like that, rooms and meals. To show you sort of, this is a summary. This is also on that witness page. This is a summary of our funding and where it comes from. So you can see, we did have a big push with American Rescue Act funding, but that'll be going away. Previously, it really was capital that was the bigger chunk. And so I think you'll see that shift come back, hopefully. Clean Water Fund is also another big chunk, and that's, the dedicated money that we just talked about. There's the Clean Water Board that meets and determines a budget, submits it to the legislature, and then it goes through that to be approved. But essentially, it's much more flexible money. Doesn't have to be for capital projects like capital funds do. So it is, again, a lot of our education outreach, and then agronomic practices. So things that are just like 1 year, you have to do it every single year. Those are not capital eligible. So all of those practices fall under generally the Clean Water Act.
And that would be like the FAP, the cover crop.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So when you look at like some of the phosphorus reductions, here's Lake Champlain, phosphorus reductions, agriculture is, a really big chunk. Typically, it's always the majority, but it's typically upwards of 90% of the reductions. Most of those practices that accomplish that are annual practices. And that is simply because when you look at the nature of Vermont and the water quality issues, at least in Lake Champlain has a huge ratio of land to water, which is very uncommon. A lot of lakes are a lot smaller. So I think it's 19-1. So 19 acres of land to 1 acre of water in the actual Lake Champlain. And so there's a lot of watershed that drains into the lake. And when you look at the land use in the watershed, there is a good deal of agricultural land, right? The two biggest counties, basically Franklin and Addison County, are in that watershed for agriculture. Orleans is the third, but it's outside of the watershed.
Part of it's in there.
A little bit. But so in order to address agricultural concerns, the majority of the concern becomes the cropland or the land base of agriculture. And so in order to address that, the annual practices and every year, because each year farms are making decisions on how they're going to manage all of that land. And so it's an important piece. And it's something that I've definitely heard people have criticism to say, well, is it sustainable? It has to be done every year. And I think the reality is it's always been like that, right? Every year farmers have to make decisions about how they manage their land. And so I do think it is sustainable in that method. At least what I've seen, and hopefully you've all seen it too, there's been a big change. It used to be you drive around in the winter and everything was moldboard plowed, which is turning the entire topsoil over. And there were no buffers, the soil would be dripping into the ditches. Now what you see a lot more cover cropping. So green covered fields that then get put into corn or soybean. And then you should see the buffers, right? 25-foot buffers on surface waters and 10-foot on ditches. That's a big change. And, for the majority of that, the state did not compensate farmers for the buffers. There are programs, if you go above and beyond the regulatory standards, you can do those. But farmers took that on their own. And then, cover cropping as an example, yes, there is money for cover cropping, but the amount of cover cropping farmers do outside of the money is grand. It's a significant amount of cover cropping. So just the influence of having resources to allow farmers to try things, farmers have adopted them beyond that. That makes sense with their own money.
Question, Representative Byrd.
What's the reasoning behind This is phosphorus load reduction. Is there any data on coming from this side of wastewater treatment facilities in the state?
Yeah, so basically the natural resources, the green would encompass that in this graphic.
Okay.
But yeah, absolutely. So everyone, every sector, stormwater, wastewater, agriculture, transportation, has to do their best to account, right? A lot of it is modeling, admittedly, but wastewater treatment plants are often not, right? Because they can measure out of a pipe. But everyone has to use the best science and information available. And the Agency of Natural Resources is the body that centralizes all of this data. So all of us, like Agency of Transportation or Agriculture, we report data from our systems to ANR, and then ANR, there's a whole body that actually looks at how you estimate these reductions. And EPA is actually on that committee, and it's very conservative, really, what they've decided, because they wanted to be conservative to make sure that there was assurance, essentially. So practices, a lot of the ag practices, for instance, are only like what they can accomplish. They're only getting credit for about half of what they can accomplish in some instances, just because of that assurance. So these numbers are actually, if we really use the max, it would be much higher in terms of reduction potential. But yeah, there's a whole process to it.
Okay, so, and then wastewater treatment facilities fall under natural resources.
Mhm,
Okay,
yeah.
that's it, because in my mind, I was thinking natural resources would be like, forest land, non-ag land, okay.
Yeah, and I mean, the whole watershed's a very interesting thing, because yes, we have wastewater treatment plants. We are not a superpopulated area, right? So if you look at other places, their load from wastewater treatment or developed landscape is much, much greater. So we have a smaller footprint on the landscape. We still have a pretty good, I think I have a graphic in here. Yeah, to kind of show you the natural resources. Again, well, this one does split out wastewater here. You can see it as far as what the contribution is and then what it needs to get to. And so it's an interesting thing, because we don't have a lot of space or capacity to make reductions in wastewater. And there's this desire for space to develop more, right? So that we have capacity for humans. And so that slice of the pie does not slim down all that much. And instead, what you do see is that the agricultural pie actually gets larger. So a lot of the reductions are being asked to be taken from farming in this process. So that's why I think a lot of these programs help incentivize farmers to do more are really important, because farmers essentially have been asked to not about what they're contributing, but to do even more so that society can get the benefit of water quality.
This chart, the green shading, the two pie charts is labeled natural resources. But going back to Representative Bird's question, so this is not referring to the Agency of Natural Resources. This is
Correct, yeah.
referring to
Natural resources, forest, wetlands, those types of
Yeah, it's
things.
funny that wastewater treatment we lumped into natural resources in my mind, just because it doesn't seem like a natural
Yeah.
resource.
Yeah, so it becomes like agency specific,
Got it,
depending
okay.
on how you look at it, because Agency of Natural Resources regulates wastewater treatment plants. But this is a sector by sector graphic that really does help split it out a little bit more to understand all the, what everyone's contributing is the left graph, and then what everyone has to be at is the right graph to meet the TMDL for Lake
Laura,
Representative Lipsky. Yeah, go ahead.
if you go back to the previous vertical, yeah. Transportation related stormwater, how is that defined? Maybe so.
Yeah, I mean, to be clear, Agency of Natural Resources is your much better body to get information about all the other sectors, because they manage all of this data. But my understanding is, there are permits, they call them TS4 permits for transportation. So there's stormwater permits for AOT. For example, AOT has to go through that process. And so that's the work that they're doing in that space, building infrastructure for stormwater, for their road networks is
Roads,
tallied in
bridges,
here.
culverts.
Yeah, but certainly the way that they manage and do projects to maybe separate some stormwater before it goes right into a brook or slow it down. Not an expert in that space, but those types of.
But that could
management.
include armoring of ditches with 8-inch minus stone to catch turbidity before it.
It very well may, because a lot of the stormwater is looking at sort of turbidity and sedimentation versus phosphorus, because it's much easier to have practices that focus on managing that type of stuff. So,
Thank you.
yeah.
Representative Nelson?
Yeah, two things. Is this year over year or is this cumulative since it started in 2016?
This is each year's reductions. So what could be repetitive in here as an example is if farmer A started in 2016 and farmer A is still doing it each year, because again, most of this is annual practice, then farmer A is accounted for each year.
Okay, so if 2016 was 10 farms and they keep doing the same thing across, but now we got this many more farms.
Mhm.
Okay, all right, great, thank you. And then on that 8-inch minus, I could never ever understand putting all those knee scrapers and face smashers on the edge of the road where people are bicycling to remove turbidity when we know that Reed's canary grass will grow thicker than quills on a porcupine and will absolutely remove turbidity. I just never, of course, I gotta mow the roadside then, but I can never figure that out. You don't want me to go do my buffers in stone, but you love them in grass, and I do too. And it works. I can never figure out why they did that on the roadsides.
Good question for AOT.
Talk to Matt.
All right, we'll let you get back to ag here.
Yeah, so I'll show you a couple more of the programs that we do. So the BMP, this is our best management practice, our biggest program. You can kind of see the dollar values, right? So 3.8 million, 5.8 million, and there's usually a significant match from the farmers on this one. This is the brick and mortar, the silage leachate collection system. So all the feed juice, essentially, not letting it go into a brook, having it be collected, and then land applied according to a nutrient management plan. Manure storage. We've done a lot more in the last couple of years, specifically with smaller farms. So here's an example. Whoops. And maybe I can make this bigger so you can see the pictures. But with the smaller farms, we've spent a good deal of time working with NOFA, which has been great because the organic farms, they have requirements that the animals have to have outdoor access. Well, we get a lot of precipitation in Vermont. So as you're outdoors, your manure and urine are going to mix with stormwater, and water always has to leave, or else you've got cows standing in a swimming pool with their own problems. And so, you can see here is an example on the left of a farm that the animals were outdoors and they were trying to contain, but obviously there's breaks in the blocks, there's breaks in the gate. And so you can have runoff leaving a site where animals are congregated. And so the solution here in this case is if you get the precipitation off the barnyard, so by covering it, and then this, we call these porches. We should call them lanais or something more exciting for cows, but it's the sunlight requirement that NOFA requires. So it allows them to go out, the animals to go out on the porch and get the sunlight that they need, and it minimizes the space that is going to be in direct contact with surface water for runoff challenges. So this, this in particular, this one looks like it's gravel, but sometimes once they get set up, they can be cleaned and scraped out too and managed appropriately.
So chips, a lot of chips.
Yeah, there's different management styles, but in essence, the idea is just to really remove precipitation. So we've been working a lot with small farms in these spaces, and large farms and small farms definitely have different practices that apply to them. And this concept is a very common one.
Where is Osgood's farm?
Correct.
There we go.
There you go. And then, oops, well, I'll switch to here. I think there's some pictures. Sorry to make you busy. So here's a picture. Again, this is not covering the barnyard, but at least taking all of this where it's difficult to scrape and collect the manure because otherwise it'll build up, it'll get integrated with the mud, and it just creates an area of concentrated nutrients that each time it rains can run off. By putting in this type of situation, they can scrape it and take it to the manure storage. So it just certainly minimizes it. And again, this is kind of a smaller farm. But also, of course, manure storages, things like that are eligible in that program. And also in this program, to go back to the dollars here, this program and a lot of this match comes from federal. So if you've ever heard of EQIP, EQIP, it's the Environmental Quality Incentives Program. It's USDA, NRCS. So it's the federal government has a program that essentially does very similar practices to this program. We follow their standards most of the time, et cetera. But they never give 100% cost share, and nor do we. But they usually, their goal is 75%. Sometimes what we see is sometimes projects come lower at like 50% of the cost share because they're using flat estimates, and we've seen prices go up, and they are a little behind on, changing that. It's just a process to get things changed. So we come in and we are often that match for that program in many instances. So if, say, a farm is getting 50%, we may be able to get them up to 90%. So the two programs work in tandem, and it's the bulk of that program. And in statute, we are required to first look at utilizing that federal money first, and then we can do state-only projects.
TBD. They're gonna write a farm bill in the next decade, or so that becomes an actual number?
Yeah, I hope. No.
So, we're in fiscal year 25 now. Is TBD, was it always TBD, or when do we normally know what that number would be?
Well, the farm bill has been significantly delayed.
But it has been.
There's a continuing resolution, right? So it's, again, TBD is until we really truly understand the budget. Obviously, NRCS has money. Obviously, there's a lot up in the air at this moment. And so they're trying to navigate, they're doing a lot of work to redo their ranking, get project through the system. So we're communicating with them, trying to stay in the loop, and, they will have resources. The interesting thing is in Vermont, at least, if you looked at the federal budget, it used to be maybe 12 million a year for these types of programs, and it jumped way up to 25. And so that huge peak, I suspect we'll see that come down a bit, but it won't be that there won't be resources for farmers. So, move on to other programs that we do. So this one, we call it CREP, and this is a tree buffer program. It's another federal match program. You can see the state spends a lot less money than the feds in this particular program. And it essentially is for planting trees along streams or planting grass at a wider strip than is allowed in regulations. But the difference is with this particular program, you cannot harvest that grass. That grass must stay and not be harvested. And they're usually 15-year contracts that folks sign up for. But the program's nice. Like if you're a grazer, this is a really good program because it'll help you with fencing, with crossings. It'll plant the trees for you. It'll do a little maintenance. And you get an annual payment to continue to do it from the USDA. And so you get a good deal of infrastructure because when you're at that stage where you're doing grazing, the US Fish and Wildlife will come in and match up to 100%. So it literally pays for itself. You lose land, but I think the overall benefits for farms that are seeking the infrastructure is certainly helpful. So here's an example of a stream crossing. We typically hard pack it so that it's not an erosion. So a different, smaller minus, but same concept. And then they plant in these buffer areas, plant some trees. And we have, in this presentation, we have this great photo series of just, here's an example where a brook went right through a production area. The farmer agreed to put the fence back, put a proper crossing in, and now you can see years later, it's all grown up in trees, and the farmer's still utilizing the crossing and maintaining it. Pretty cool program. Whoa. Oh dear. Oops. So Capital Equipment Assistance Program. This is a program that hasn't been around too long, but it's essentially an equipment program. So we won't buy you a tractor, but say for instance, you're gonna plant corn, you already have a corn planter. If you want to plant no-till corn, you need different equipment. And so this will help people buy those attachments that can help them do different practices, but do them better. And so a lot, drills, so getting seed drilled into the ground, no-till as well for corn. And then, manure injection is another one. So being able to put manure under the ground where the roots are rather than on the surface where it can run off. For the smaller farms, we often are starting to look at how do we get dry storage essentially. And then so I talked about how we've been building the covers to keep the manure dry, but then they need additional equipment to help. And there's new innovations in spreading solid manure. And so some farmers are looking to get that newer equipment that can help spread that a little bit better and more evenly. And then also in silage, for instance, instead of doing the traditional, let's collect your runoff, keep it all liquid, and then you land apply it, we can help with, if it's, we assess the site, we make sure that it's basically a cost benefit assessment. If putting in that liquid infrastructure and doing it that way, which is the traditional way, would cost more, then least cost we can look at, can they do wraparound bales and stack those and, maybe in the bunk, for instance, because they're not going to have as much juice. They're just not, they're wrapped up and protected. And so looking at how we can utilize different pieces of equipment to get at water quality improvements.
Representative Nelson?
Thank you. Gary listening tour was in Orleans County Monday. And some of the smaller producers were talking about how some of these programs don't fit those smaller farms. And maybe it's in the NRCS department, but they talked about what cost share for hiring someone to come inject their manure into their fields. Because it's a, $40,000 investment and then the toolbar. And, I need to use it 10 days a year. It doesn't so much make sense for them. So I just wanted to.
Yeah, so through the Farm Agronomic Practice Program, they can get payments to do injection.
Okay, great.
There's
Yeah, that's right.
obviously, there's obviously a cap, so farmers can't, they have to choose what they're going to do. They can't do cover crop, depending on their acreage, and not hit all these caps. So they have to make choices. But this program, this capital equipment will also help the custom applicators purchase that equipment so that there is more equipment to be utilized because it's a challenge. A lot of people use custom manure applicators, and to give these folks the ability to get out there and have more equipment so that each crew can be running with this technology is.
So this is available for custom applicators.
This program can be farmers or custom applicators.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep. And we have some, UVM, for instance, has utilized some of this funding too, where they can get other grants to get matched to buy equipment because they have, UVM has quite a fleet of equipment that they do demos, right? That they can help farmers test and try equipment. And then farmers might come here. And one of the things, this is a very competitive program. There are more people who come to this program than we ever can fund. But a lot of that equipment with UVM, it's like, I've tried this on my farm. I have experience with this because if you're brand new, you've never tried it, it doesn't give you as many ranking points as obviously if you have tried it and you've got experience with it.
We taking testimony, I say that Vermont Natural Resource conservation districts and down in the Medway watershed, parts of Rutland County, there were a lot of small farms that they collectively bought some of these injectors. The conservation district would share with a lot of members in that lower Champlain district. Are they eligible
Yes,
for these same kind of funds?
they are. Some of the challenges we've seen with some of that, not to say it's, the old extension used to have equipment. It'd be like, going to your Ace Hardware to
Well,
rent
this was a
something.
unique group that did.
It is, yeah, but the challenge becomes with shared equipment is who broke it, who's fixing it, who's transporting it, those kinds of issues. And when a district owns it, a district does have challenges with not having just funds to fix all of this, nor maybe the skills, right? Like the farmers. So through that first program, I told you that we give money to partners. Some of those partners have asked for maintenance on some of those equipment pieces. So we have provided funding to help them get that maintenance done. But it becomes a real cost, and it's a lot of work to move equipment amongst farmers. So farmers can do it as a cooperative amongst themselves, a district, UVM. There's all combinations.
Replitsky, as opposed to your skidder, these things wear out, they go in the dirt. They have a lot of wear items.
As opposed to. Thank you for enlightening.
Representative O'Brien.
Laura, how much do some of these things cost too?
Oh, they're significant, and we don't cover, a good deal of it. So like a manure injection system easily is $250,000. And so,
Wow.
$250,000, like when you get the drag line hose and you get the toolbar, you get all the things.
I would buy that all day long, we're looking at like 1 million.
If you get if you're doing, like, we usually buy small pieces, right? And people put it together, and year after year, they might come and say, well, I've got this first piece, then I'm coming for the second piece. So yeah, it's not, and we don't offer $250,000, right? So it depends on the practice, what we offer, but it is a significant investment on the farmer's part to do these
Yeah.
projects. Despite, yes, they are larger grants, but they're larger cost.
Farm bill.
So here's an example, of the no-till grain drill, for this farmer.
I shoot.
Yeah. So FAP, we've talked a little bit about this. This is the Farm Agronomic Practice Program, which is basically the annual in the field doing practices. So it's this program, you can see, yes, $1 million, $2 million is a lot of money, but the bang for the buck in this program is huge. Because again, that cropland and doing those practices are estimated to be a large portion of the reductions. And you can see that, significant land in just this program. And this program is not even the federal program, and it's not even what farmers are doing on their own. So it's quite a bit.
I'm surprised. I know how much money we spent, how much we got in FAP, And we had another program through the conservation district that covered 180 acres. We covered almost 1,000 acres on,
With cover crop.
yeah, and, I'm surprised to see that, 32,000 acres. That's a third of the corn acres in the states, more than a third.
Yep.
And, which is great. I'm just surprised. I don't know if that's underreported or
Well, again, we cap, I think the cap is like $10,000 per farm.
$10,000.
So, significantly, you're doing significantly more than what we may have given resources for. And so we're not counting your full acreage. That's what I'm saying. Like, this is just what this program paid for. There's what farmers are doing on their own, and there's what they're doing through USDA.
So did you use the reported acres that they have to go back in and report, or did you use just a math equation to come up with this number? Because like some farms, they hire the cover crop and done. So they use that $10,000 to help pay the person that they custom hired. Whereas some farms don't expense out the tractor, the man time and stuff. I mean, we use it to buy all seed. We bought seed with it. All of it.
Yep, so we don't have to look at specifically what you paid for. We're looking for how many acres did you do, and it's a flat per acre rate.
Yeah.
And so you may have done more acres, you may report to us that you've done more acres, but we only tally
Okay,
the per acre value that we gave. So,
What are the, what practices are covered under this?
cover cropping, no-till, manure injection. So again, all these agronomic and some pasture hayland planting. So
okay, all right.
in
that would
this
change the
program
number.
too, you know, we've set it to be, if you're a grazer, for instance, if you leave 3 inches of grazing grass, like tall grass, then we'll pay you for that incentive because we've, you know, the longer and taller you leave the grass, the better and healthier the roots are and the whole system is. And so incentivizing people not to graze it way down, right? So where it's not gonna have those benefits. So it does everything. It does, you know, some things
Yeah.
for the smaller farms, something for the bigger farms.
Understood now. Thank you.
Yeah, and there's example of like mixing different species into doing cover cropping. So this one is our newest program, and this is kind of the program you were in, Mr. Nelson. We've revamped it a little bit, but essentially the idea is making wider strips along surface waters and ditches that you can then harvest, right? So they're beyond the regulatory threshold of what needs to be done, but they're integrating them more into a farming system rather than just having them be a set aside buffer that you just essentially mow once in a while. Like this encourages farmers to really stay on top of and manage that grass area a little bit more. So this is, we've just revamped it and we're hopeful. We're gonna put a lot more outreach into it this year. We've dedicated part of a staff to go out and do some of this work to sort of just try and get the word out to see if we can do this. It can also see down larger, like critical areas, so like even whole fields. So we can do anything from the wider strips to the whole fields to grass waterways, which essentially they've always been a challenge to put in because, and I think technology is getting to where it could be better, but you know, the idea before you had the ability to shut off and on sprayers from the cab, right? The ability to stop and pick up and then go over a grass waterway and start back up again with all of your equipment is getting better to where historically people just didn't really want something in the middle of their field as they're trying to drive both ways. So we'll see if this improves, but the goal is to really look at erosion areas and making sure we have wider buffers where people are willing to. So there's Richard's beautiful buffer.
It's, so that starts way up in the top right corner,
Up
up
here.
by the road, comes down around towards us. It crosses the ditch, that certified ditch. It crosses the ditch and it runs all the way up to the center, up top. And then goes back behind us the other way, and it's 14 acres. There's roughly 100 acres of cornland there. And we put in 14 acres of buffer. And the gentleman, and I forget their names, and I should never.
Ben and Phil, maybe?
Ben and Phil, and I hope they're doing this program.
Yep.
Because they were wonderful to work with and some of the greatest cheerleaders that I've worked with and supportive and made you feel good about what we did.
Yeah. Well, it's beautiful. And I'll tell you, that photo is pretty picturesque. Good lighting.
Sky's nice.
It
is,
Did you take that photo, Richard?
No,
I didn't, no.
Yeah.
It is
Ben or Phil did,
Yeah.
yeah.
Representative O'Brien.
Laura, this is just trying to avoid cultivated land next to various waterways, wetlands, et cetera.
That's part of it, but then this here is, again, even wider. So just that further protection, right? There's plenty of research on buffers and their effectiveness, and they're very effective even at smaller sizes, but the bigger you make them, obviously, they're even more protective of the soil.
But in this case, you could hay right, you know, either on a river or a wetland, you can hay right down to wherever it's considered safe. It's not like a buffer next to another buffer.
No, this can be harvested, but again, manure restrictions
Right,
exist.
yeah.
So.
Yeah, so in this case, down further, like right in here, there was conflicting slopes. And at 50 feet, Phil wanted us to tongue up in to slow that water down as a collection point. And that, you know, out there walking it and talking it, we said, well, what if we go to our mowers 32 or 3 feet wide? If we go in at 70 feet. And he did some calculations, says 70 feet's perfect. You know, 70 feet everywhere is perfect. And so this should have the same effect and not have a couple tongues running up into the cornfield that then we have to go around or jump and go over. And yeah, and there'll be no manure applied in here.
Who said it's like a shallow swale, natural?
Yeah, it was. And so now by going wider, if the water does collect here and come down, it's got this flat area here and it'll dissipate out.
So, and I think you're probably in a 10-year agreement on that.
10-year agreement, yeah, and then we'll.
So figure out what you're doing.
We'll keep it going. We're pretty proud of that and we look forward to doing more.
Laura, we've only got a few more minutes and I know you've got some other programs that you haven't had a chance to get to. And maybe we'll have you just sort of go through them quickly, but I wanted to also, before we wrapped up, just ask about the 18 million, which I think roughly was the 2024 amount. And it's going to be a smaller amount in 25. You mentioned that it's going to be getting smaller, but just thinking, if we didn't have that funding and we're entering uncharted waters here, both with federal funding and then by extension, that will impact state funding. If we were in a world where we didn't have discretionary funding available, what would that mean? Just stepping back and thinking a little bit about what the impacts of that would be.
Yeah, I mean, at this point in the state of Vermont, you know, we have significant regulations compared to what other states have in terms of water quality requirements. And farmers have the resources available, you know, usually through USDA to do a lot of those fixes. If USDA money declines, it will put more pressure on the state programs to do those projects. And obviously we prioritize the biggest risk, right, to water as the first priority. So in theory, it could challenge the accomplishments that need to be done. But so far we haven't seen that yet. And we haven't, you know, the sense is that the agricultural programs are being treated not consistently, what's the word? Like, we haven't seen major cuts yet from federal, but I don't know that we've seen everything that's going to happen federally. So hopefully it doesn't, but it's, you know, there was pauses on things for a little bit, but then they've been kind of lifted. And so the hope is that it's not significantly that negative in terms of a reduction. But if it is, obviously, it just means you've really got to prioritize which projects you do. And certainly some projects get more bang for the buck in terms of reductions than others. And so we all, whether state or federal, have ranking criteria that already looks at some of that. And so I think what you'll see is, you know, maybe you call it the low hanging fruit. That stuff isn't maybe going to get addressed, but the major issues would still be managed.
Overall, the intent of these programs is to incentivize farmers to help us meet the required reductions. These are not, but correct me if I'm wrong, these are not programs that if we didn't have the funding or decided to use funding in a different way, that we would be able to meet those targets.
So the targets, if we're talking like Champlain TMDL.
Yes, that's what I'm thinking of.
For the majority, when you modeled what our rules are, it met all of that goal, except for the north and the south parts of Lake Champlain. And in those regions, we had to do even more. And essentially in those regions, you've kind of got two things going on. Up in the north, Missisquoi Bay is incredibly shallow. I think it's like 12 feet deep at its deepest, which is not very deep. And, you know, thousands of years, the rivers have gone into that shallow bay. And so you have, you know, you've got to remember too, historically, we completely cleared the landscape. We did phosphate at high levels. And so all of that is in the bay now. And so this internal loading and, no septics for years, factories, whatever, like the world is sitting, phosphorus doesn't go anywhere. It's sitting in the bottom of Missisquoi Bay. And so in order to have that segment meet the water quality goals, you essentially have to starve it, right? Because the idea of like dredging it is too big. It's too big of a water body to physically remove those things. So you essentially have to shut off the incoming valve so that the lake can process what is in it. And so that's why in that region, there's a lot more requirement for farms because farms essentially have to go on a diet of less than what they actually produce. And then in the southern part, there's some really heavy soils down there. And when you look at, we actually took some of the samples as a state and sent them to the lab for USDA. They're the most erosive soils in the country. And they had never seen, they realized like, oh my gosh, this is why.
Addison County clay.
That Addison County clay, yeah. And so they stay in suspension. So, there's been all these photos of plumes going into the lake that you may have seen.
Brown.
That milky brown is the soil, and it happens even on hayland. You lose the soil because as soon as, and Joshua Faulkner is doing some research about the mineral composition and believing that the mineral composition is actually what may be changing. I can't remember if it was manganese or magnesium, that it's a very high level in it. And so they think that's what's keeping it in suspension consistently. Not only is it a fine particle that stays in suspension, but there may also be chemical reasons that it's sort of staying in suspension. And so you just have these erosive soils that tend to stay there. So you've just got these two challenges in these two areas that are natural at some level, right? Like there are things that have happened and we're not going to be able to turn back that clock. And so in those areas, the regulations plus some of the incentives are what are needed to meet the goals.
Are these incentive programs then targeted towards the north and south? Would anybody be eligible? But
so far we haven't had to do that because we've been, having good resources, but those are the kinds of things that we can look at as things start to narrow in, is to make sure that we meet the goals.
if you want to just take a minute or two, then we should probably take a break. But if you want to just wrap up.
Yeah, sure. I'll just show you there's just a couple of other programs. Pasture surface water fencing is a program for grazers, helps them put in infrastructure. This program is, we only put about $250,000 to it each year, but it's growing substantially. That we worked with UVM and other partners to really build a lot more grazing support for farmers, because it does take a lot of one-on-one working on the farm and testing and not testing, but like trying things on your farm and making sure they work and adapting from there. And so that program, I think you'll see grow. And then we have 2 incentive programs. So this one, there was a whole process for a couple of years where ecosystem services was discussed with the whole stakeholder group. And essentially what the outcome of this is there's a USDA program called Conservation Stewardship Program. So like say you're regular cover cropping, but then you're willing to add different species and create more diversity with your cover cropping. That's what that program does. It says, you're already doing something good, let's make it even better. And so what we do with this program is we basically create an incentive on top of that so that people really do have motivation. That USDA program was very undersubscribed. And when we started doing this, the enrollment has gone significantly up. I mean, part of that is obviously the incentive, but also NRCS put some effort into the program. So you can see we do about $500,000 a year in that program to help incentivize farmers to go even further above and beyond. And then the last program here is a pay for performance program. So this program essentially is, the concept is Lake Champlain has a goal of 40% reduction. There's this huge model that goes behind it, but you're literally putting everything in from your nutrient management plan into this model. And so we, for instance, are paying like conservation district staff to work with a farmer to get all this data into the system. And then it crunches it out and it says, okay, well, if you did all of this to meet 40%, whatever you did above that, that's what we pay you on. So when you accomplish more than is required for the TMDL, you get incentivized essentially. But it's your actual practices every year. So you put in what's planned, you can see kind of what it's going to look like, and you can go, you know what, I think I can do more on that field. And you can change your plan if if you see that, it's just a way to think about your farm differently and be able to plan and know that there'll be support for you if you do that project. So it's split into, the first set is a data entry payment because there's a lot of data entry. And then incentives once you go above 40% reduction.
Or do you have to be in essentially the Champlain watershed in order to qualify?
No, it is statewide, but yeah, it's just a lot of data to put in, so farmers have to be really willing.
But how would you know, say you were the Gladstones and the Connecticut, how would you know your sort of TMDL?
We use the same 40% and just
Oh, okay.
treated it fair, yeah.
Good. All right. Well, thank you, Laura, for
Yeah, of course.
bringing this in. And so you opened by mentioning that you also have a report that I don't know that we've seen on a report that you do annually for the legislature on regulatory efforts. So maybe we can have you back at some point.
Absolutely, yeah, there's two reports. One of them is very, very minimal. It's an MOU report where both AR and
That
I,
we've seen.
that one we've talked about, and then, yeah, the other one is, if my presentation here that's under witness, if you go to the end of that presentation, actually, I'm in the report. There is a Power BI dashboard. So just a quick reminder, if you go to the end of this presentation, there's this. And you can click on this and it's.
We're not seeing that, I don't think.
Yeah. I'm struggling to stop the screen. Oh, there it goes. Regardless, we can come back and talk about it.
Okay.
That has the data in it, so you could see it as well.
Okay, good. All right. Yes, thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you. Always happy to answer questions.
We'll take a break. Let's keep it to 10 minutes because we've got another segment before the more